Hey friends, I'm glad to be back today. And today I want to talk about listening to your gut intuition, why you need to, especially when you're in the middle of a toxic relationship. So today we're going to talk about toxic relationships, but better yet, about listening to your gut and why you should listen to your gut instinct instead of just referring to your mind when you're in the middle of this type of relationship. So what I found out about toxic relationships, our mind versus our gut intuition, is that our mind is easily manipulated. So I want to first begin with the reasons why we should listen to our gut intuition when we find ourselves in what we know as a toxic relationship. Because our minds are easily manipulated, we can be convinced by other people if they're doing something right, especially when we want to believe that other person so much, right? Yeah. Our mind will actually create doubt, our own self-doubt that we're misjudging, miscalculating, so that we'll stay in that relationship no matter what. Between the crumbs of validation and the glimpses of potential and that hope that that person will change, we stay in the relationship to our own demise. Now, what I mean by crumbs of validation, when you have those crumbs, right? It could be, for example, that somebody puts you down in front of other people, goes from extremes, from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, and then in the same process gives you flowers. Okay? The flowers are very beautiful, but really in this situation, they are the crumbs. And when we're in toxic, unhealthy relationships, we hold on to those crumbs, those small validations, because that's all we have. Everything else is either toxic or based on the potential that we think that somebody can be, or those glimpses that we see of them based on that potential. And so I've realized that when we are in toxic relationships, we've got to rely on our gut intuition. We must fortify that intuition, and we must listen to that over our easily manipulated mind. Your mind is easily manipulated over your gut intuition because our mind's always looking for that evidence in a toxic relationship. A good example is having those questionings that your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend is cheating on you. There's these red flags, but you have no proof. You're looking around for the proof. You're being a private eye investigating the situation, but you can't find it. And our minds seem to need that proof, even though when our gut doesn't. It's like we have to prove it to ourselves. And I know that some of you, and I've been in relationships before where I've stayed in way too long, looking for that proof, never actually finding that proof, but knowing in my heart of hearts that this relationship is not the right one for me. It's interesting though, when we look toward our gut intuition and we realize that yes, indeed, this might be a valuable thing for us to begin to work on, there's certain things that we have to do in order to make sure that our gut intuition is right on point. Sometimes we have to clean house to make sure that that is the case. And so one of the things that you want to do when you've realized that yes, okay, I can depend on my mind, but my gut reaction is very quick. And if I stabilize that reaction and work to basically power it up, it will be right almost all the time, if not all the time. Because I think really when we listen to our gut and when we're listening to it and we're working with it, it really is right. So we have to begin by identifying our core beliefs about ourselves, okay? Now, why we want to identify our core beliefs that began at our birth and continue to shape our life until we stop and examine them is because our core beliefs actually kind of like dictate what our life is about. It dictates who we are, and it kind of rules us. So the way that we believe about ourselves from the very beginning directly relates to our thoughts, to how we create our life. Are we creating a really happy, healthy, well-balanced life, or are we not? Are we surrounded by unhealthy people that seems normal because that's something that we have been around since our birth? And we also must realize that our thoughts become things. So depending on how we think about ourselves needs to be addressed, because all these things need to be accounted for so that we understand that our gut is actually reflecting to the best of our highest ability, instead of something that we sold ourselves a bill of goods a long time ago that's not necessarily healthy. An important caveat to this is that many of us grew up in families and households where we had unhealthy relationships with mom or dad or whoever raised us. These unhealthy relationships, maybe there was toxic relationships, maybe there was a narcissistic mom or dad or something else. And when we grew up around this, it seemed normal to us, but it's unhealthy. The more we're around unhealthy behavior, the more normal it seems to us. And so we need to really reflect on what is normal, what is healthy, and we need to begin to clean house. Because when we do that, understand our gut regulates us. Our gut is based on what is the best for our highest good. And our highest good is best on our highest belief for ourselves, right? It's a two-way street. They're both linked. So we have to be sure that we want the best for ourselves, and that there's nothing standing in the way from that we've established at our core relationship with ourselves that might have been based on some unhealthy relationships or some not so truthful information that we got when we were kids. So when we're doing all this, we're identifying what we think about ourselves at our core. We're moving through that pain and that negativity that we've dealt with our life. And we begin to accept what's happened to us in our life, forgiving others and forgiving ourselves for any wrongdoing, as well as beginning to allow clear opportunity to actually move into our lives, okay? Because oftentimes what happens is we have a negative broken record that's going on that's telling us that we're never going to be happy, or never going to be successful, or never going to find what we want to find. There's a lot of self-limiting beliefs, right? And when we're living our life based on these self-limiting beliefs, it's hard for us to realize, one, what's toxic, right? What's normal and toxic, and then what's not toxic and what's healthy. And we need to identify that. So when we begin to identify our past situations and letting go of this wrongdoing, we're clearing the negativity, we're beginning to clear the pain, we're doing a lot of forgiveness, but we're getting rid of that frustration and anger that often gets in the way of us making proper choices, okay? When I was growing up in my family, I didn't know a lot of this stuff. I had to go through this and learn it on my own. And my relationship with my father, now we're very good, but there was a lot of anger and resentment I had toward him when I was growing up. I've worked through it and I've let it go. But I had to, because that anger was permeating every one of my thoughts and feelings. I couldn't get past that anger to be able to see things clearly. And we can't compartmentalize really anger in any area of our life, because what it does is it affects every part of our life, and it affects it in a negative way. So we have to let go of that childhood anger and that pain, because that causes blockages in our life, and it will not allow us to continue in a healthy behavior. We'll keep going down that road of unhealthy behavior and negative choices and self-limiting choices that we've chosen in the past. Okay, so going back to the fact that we're in this toxic relationship and we're wanting to listen to our gut to go within instead of listening to what others are telling us to do. Okay, or listening to what others tell us we're supposed to do, or reading blogs, or reading articles, or, well, I'm this age and I'm in this relationship, what am I supposed to do? Instead of that, and instead of being easily manipulated by just listening to our mind and writing out pros and cons and holding on to those validation and those crumbs that we're given, we need to begin to listen to our gut. So how do we begin to listen to our gut? How do we build our gut up enough and our intuition for it to speak to us and to understand clearly that this is what we need to do? Okay, the first thing you want to do is you want to build up your gut intuition by actually listening to it, right? Consistency is key to anything in life, and it's also true to listening to your gut intuition. Anytime we're consistent with anything in our life, things start falling into place in our life, right? That's a good example. A great example is being consistent at your responsibility, taking care of your duties. The same thing is when you're consistently listening to your gut and you're actually deciding and making decisions based on that, your gut intuition gets louder, it gets clearer, and it's even quicker. Because also for the first time, you're beginning to respect your gut intuition, and that directly relates to you respecting yourself more, right? Believing in yourself more, and not doubting yourself as much as you were. The second thing is that you're identifying when you're looking for that proof in a relationship. You begin to identify when you've become that detective in that relationship, and you ask yourself, why am I actually doing this? Why am I putting myself through this hell? Am I able to recognize the fact that I'm in an uncertain place? I feel like I'm in a mysterious type relationship. There seems to be like a lot of crazy making here. So can I step back and identify that situation I'm in and say, okay, with all this uncertainty, with all these questions, with all these red flags, with no concrete evidence, do I feel like going down this rabbit hole is really helping me? Or do I need to listen to my intuition and feel that, hey, I feel a pit in my stomach. I feel really tightened up. I feel very anxious. My heart begins to palpitate when I'm in this situation. I feel feelings of dread when I'm around this person. There's certain things that I'm feeling. I probably need to begin to listen to that, because if I'm going to sit around and listen and wait for proof and evidence, I might be waiting for my entire life while my whole life is passing me by. And number 3, last but not least, actions speak louder than words. And I know that we hear that saying all the time, actions speak louder than words, but isn't it interesting how our minds like to hold on to the words instead of the actions? Isn't that interesting? It's like we want to justify the whole toxic relationship based on what that person told us, how we're supposed to think, okay? And a good example of that is you're in a relationship and you feel like you're being cheated on by your spouse or your girlfriend or your boyfriend. Perhaps they're putting you down in front of other people. They're making you feel bad. They're treating you poorly. I mean, the red flags are all over the place. All the evidence, you don't really have it. You don't have the person they're cheating on you with. You don't have any sort of phone records. On the flip side about them putting you down, there's nobody there around you to be like, the witness. So it's your word against theirs. When you bring it up to your friends, they say, oh, you're too emotional. You're wearing your feelings on your sleeve, So you got all that going on too. You got other people telling you how you're supposed to feel and act, right? But then all of a sudden, that same person that's probably cheating on you and putting you down, but your mind keeps telling you, but they say nice things, gives you flowers. And those flowers, it just seems like that's everything. But I think it's interesting how our mind has a tendency of when somebody tells us things, we hold on to those lovely words. We hold on to those prose, that poetry, instead of actually watching what somebody's actually doing to us. And I found that my gut is an accurate decision-making body for me when I listen to it more and more. There was a time in my life when I've been in toxic relationships that I didn't listen to my gut. I did everything but that. When my gut would be like screaming at me and my stomach would be hurting and I would tense up and I would kind of get that sick feeling, that pit in my stomach, I would continue to drive on over to the toxic relationship person's house, right? And that feeling got more and more, and I didn't want to listen to it. And it wasn't until I finally stopped that and said, okay, wait a second. There's a reason why I'm feeling bad. There's a reason why I'm getting that pit in my stomach. There's a reason for this. I might not have the evidence that I need, that my mind needs to say, oh, okay, they were cheating on me, this was happening. But you know what? You've always known in your gut. Why do you need to stick around and wait it out? Why? Are you looking for some sort of evidence, validation, to validate all the stuff that's going on? And even when you see the evidence, your mind might twist that around to being something that you did wrong. A good example is, somebody that comes into my office and thinks that their spouse is cheating on them. And then after years of going through all this pain and suffering, actually gets the evidence that the spouse is cheating on them, but then turns it around on themselves and feels bad because they feel that they must have pushed their spouse to do it. I mean, there comes a time when you got to step up and say, hey, I got this one life to live, okay? And my gut's going to be there to help me to get rid of these negative situations in my life fast, move on, and continue to move through my life. Because I've sat around in toxic negative relationships before for years, and I'm telling you, not only was it a waste of my time, but it was kind of sad how much time I did sit in that and percolate in that. And was surrounded by the crazy making myself feel crazy. And I didn't have any clarity because all this stuff was going on around me. It wasn't until I did some meditation and I went back and cleaned house on that. And I realized the unhealthy relationships I had as a child. And I realized that they were unhealthy. And then I was able to identify the unhealthy relationships, even though they were normal in my life. And then I began to listen to my gut when I came around those unhealthy relationships. It changed my life for me. And so recognize that the next time that you find yourself, or if you're currently in a toxic relationship with somebody right now, and you're questioning what you need to do, and you're feeling a lot of concern, and you kind of don't feel like steady, you feel like you're walking or standing on quicksand, it's time to really step back from that relationship, clear your mind, and really focus on your gut, because your heart and your gut has the answers that your mind is easily swayed from. And our mind can help us make really good deductive reasoning and really focus on certain choices in our life. But when it comes to things like this that are that strong, we really need to focus on the one thing that cannot be manipulated. I have a question for you. When was the last time you found yourself in a toxic relationship? And what was the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to something that person did to you? And how long did it take you to exit stage right and leave that relationship? I'd like to start a conversation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and also like this video if it's helped you and share it with other people. Life is too short to be surrounded by toxic relationships. We've got to learn to listen to our gut. The more we listen to it, the quicker we can make decisions, and the more validation we have, and the more successful and happier our life is. And don't forget, as you know, you wouldn't be watching this channel, continue to live your true life.